Hello, my name is Michael Wong, and I am the co-chair of the Veterans for Peace China Working Group, and I'm also a co-founder of Pivot to Peace. I'm here today with retired Judge Julie Tang, formerly of the San Francisco Municipal Court, who's also been a co-founder of Pivot to Peace and is one of the leaders in the Chinese community in San Francisco. I'm also joined by Ken Hammond, who's a professor at New Mexico State University. He's lived in China for more than a decade. He's studied in China, and he's very knowledgeable on China issues. We're going to be talking today about Hong Kong's new security law, Article 23. Judge Julie Tang, would you please give us an outline of the legal parameters of the law?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to congratulate every single member of the Hong Kong legislature for the courage and the resilience in passing this law. This is long overdue. During the 1997 takeover by China, as a result of the returning Hong Kong back to China, it was embedded in the Constitution, which also another name for it is the Basic Law, that Hong Kong would adopt a national security law, and that was under Article 23. And this law would provide the same kind of protection to Hong Kong as it does for 193 countries in the world, a way to protect themselves from foreign interference. This law right now that was passed unanimously really showed the world the determination of Hong Kong people to rule itself under the one country, two systems governance that China has afforded it. So just wanted to make sure I give them the big shout out. The key characteristic of Article 23 is national security. And the fact that it is drafted, created, and adopted into law by Hong Kong legislators who were democratically elected into office by the people of Hong Kong is also a major statement against all foreign interventions and efforts to obstruct Hong Kong from moving forward, getting behind them the dark shadows of 2019, where Hong Kong was just in shambles and destroyed and burned and properties ransacked. People were burned, people were killed. They just left all the dark shadows behind them and move forward. Now they can set aside all of that aside and put economy and prosperity of the city first. The national this is a in addition to the national security law that was passed by China as an emergency law as a result of the 2019-2020 riots. That riot was so out of control, and there was no law in existence that would prohibit the kind of things that they are now trying to prohibit, and that would be treason, insurrection, espionage, and theft of state secrets, sabotaging national security, external interference. All of these things were not even prohibitable. I mean, Hong Kong police can stop people and arrest them for throwing firebombs and arrest them for disturbing the peace and killing people or committing mayhem against police officers, those kind of things. But there is no specific law that would govern the kind of action that this particular law would govern. And this particular law mirrors, as I said, the earlier national security law that was passed by China as an emergency measure. So with this new law, it added to the existing national security law, streamlined some of its rules and regulations, and revising some of the existing regulations and penalties. And just as the national security law that was passed in 2021 by the People's Congress, it conforms to the rule of law and guarantees the accused due process protection, the right to trial, the right to an attorney, right to produce evidence, and the right to cross-examination of witnesses. And its basic structure is similar, actually, to the United States and the UK and all Western countries' national security law. And with this passage, Hong Kong now has its own security law. There are 193 countries in the UN. Every single country and state has its own security law. We in the United States certainly have our own. And why can't Hong Kong?
Okay, thank you. Professor Ken Hammond, would you like to give us a little background on the history and political aspects of this security law?
Yeah, I think that when when Article 23 was promulgated just this month, finally, as Julie just mentioned, it's been a long time coming. There's been widespread condemnation in the Western media, the mainstream media. This is being portrayed as some sort of autocratic crackdown in a repressive environment, and really the end of freedom in Hong Kong. And I think that needs to be that critique needs to be taken with quite a number of grains of salt, because there's sort of two main aspects that we want to bear in mind. The first is simply that as a historical development, Hong Kong prior to 1997, there were no freedoms for the Chinese citizens of Hong Kong. They had no political representation. They were what protections they had under their legal system were those that were sort of benevolently granted by their colonial masters, the British government that ruled the colony for a century and a half. Since 1997, under the Basic Law, this concern with protecting the security, the stability of Hong Kong, protecting the lives and the livelihoods of the people in Hong Kong has been, it's been a regular feature of the local government. But in the West, particularly in the United States and in some of its allied countries, there's just been this relentless assault, or this relentless critique of Hong Kong as losing its democracy, when in fact, if anything, its democracy has been founded and deepened in the years since its return to Chinese sovereignty. So I think that it's important to put this into that kind of historical context, that this is a new development in a process of constructing an open and public legal order to protect security and stability and people's livelihoods in the special autonomous zone or region, the special administrative region rather. Um, this process of adopting this new law, the new security law, was not something that was carried on in some clandestine way or behind closed doors in some kind of, image of a smoke-filled room or something like that. This was a law that was drafted, that was publicly circulated. Widespread commentary was solicited and obtained from the people of Hong Kong. They had over 13,000 public comments on the law, on the proposed legislation, and certain modifications and adjustments were made in response to those comments. And so when the law was finally promulgated, people were well aware of what its features were. This wasn't something that was snuck upon people in some clandestine way, as I say. And that's a very important thing. It's not an anti-democratic measure. It's not a measure that is stealing people's freedom, but instead it's something that has been produced in a consultative and deliberative process. And again, as Julie mentioned, other countries have their own security laws. Of course, the United States here, we need only think about our experience with things like the Espionage Act and the Foreign Intelligence Control legislation. Think of people like Julian Assange, people like Chelsea Manning, people like Edward Snowden, who have been, prosecuted, jailed, repressed, certainly. Mr. Snowden, of course, had to flee the country and has become a Russian citizen, and apparently is going to have to be living in exile from his native land for the foreseeable future. The idea that any country doesn't have the right to defend itself is simply hypocritical. And the idea that here in the United States we use these kinds of laws to suppress dissent, to suppress those who would like to expose the dark secrets of the American government. This is not a situation in which the United States has much of a moral ground, any kind of moral high ground to stand on. The same can be said for the British government. Certainly something like the Official Secrets Act there has controlled the ability of people to speak out about abuses of which they're aware in the British government for over a century. So, the idea that somehow Hong Kong and China taking these measures to protect their sovereignty, to protect their security, to defend themselves against interference from outside forces trying to subvert their own legal system. This is to say the least, it's hypocritical. But what it is, of course, most basically is political. The United States, fearing its loss of its position as the dominant power in a global system, is doing everything it can to demonize China, to criticize China, to try to portray China as a bad place, as a place where people live in fear of their government. And in the reality, things are very, very different. The government in China and the government in Hong Kong has widespread popular support. Even polls carried out by Western organizations like Harvard University and the Pew Foundation show that there's, in the 80% zone of popular support for the policies and the practices of the Chinese government and the government in Hong Kong. So the political demonization that we see directed at China over and over again by American politicians is simply, it's kind of hard to take seriously, because it's both so hypocritical and so transparently political that its objectives are not to be concerned with the supposed interests of the Chinese people and the people in Hong Kong, but instead it's a matter of a political agenda that the United States is pursuing to shore up its own domination in global affairs.
Thanks, Ken. Yes, I actually went online and looked up Hong Kong security law, the UK security law, and the US security law, and read them and compared them. And actually, the UK and the US security laws looked actually harsher to me than the Hong Kong security law. Julie, do you have any other comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, I do want to echo what Professor Hammond said about the hypocrisy of those politicians and mainstream media that have been pushing the idea that this Hong Kong's own national security law trumps the rights of the people and expose them to human rights violations. These are just nonsense, because there's not one specific iota of evidence or issue in that law that would pivot towards any violation of human rights, at least in the nature that we would object to. The law is very clear. It is what other countries also adopt, and there's nothing new about it. It is a time-honored, time-seasoned type of self-protection law against foreign interference. And I also wanted to look back into history, how when Dr. Ken Hammond talk about violating of people's democratic right in this country, it is historical with American history, and especially in terms of Asians. During the Second World War, Japanese Americans were arrested en masse and put in concentration camps, every single one of them, so that into concentration camps, so that they would prevent any espionage activities committed by Japanese Americans. And again, there was just no evidence of that. And still, at that time, national security was the pretext to violating the rights of US citizens. And so I think that with that in its historical context, and we look at what Hong Kong is trying to do to protect itself, it is just totally hypocritical. And recently, as soon as the law was passed in Hong Kong, several politicians coming out and say that they are going to now sanction these legislators in Hong Kong just as they did when the other national security law was passed, that they sanctioned some of the Hong Kong legislators. I think this is really punitive. This is not democratic at all. This is inhibiting their freedom to protect themselves, and it's so undemocratic. I really hope that our legislators will put some self-restraint on them to be a better role model than to be the kind of hegemon and the hawkish people mentality that they own, that they can push Hong Kong around because it's a small colony and it's now trying to come out of the dark shadows of 2019, 2020, move on to embrace economics, embrace free trade, and bring prosperity and peace back to Hong Kong with the support of the mother country, China. And I just hope that our legislators will see fit to restrain themselves and not make an embarrassment of themselves in world theater.
Thank you. Yes, actually, anybody can just go online and look up the three national security laws of the United States, the UK, and Hong Kong, and compare for themselves. They don't have to take our word for it. They can read it, the original, and see it. Ken, do you have any final comments you'd like to add?
Well, the only thing I was gonna add to what we've already said is actually just what the point you were making, which is that, both American politicians and the American media are engaged in this program of demonization and criticism of China. And I think that what we should recommend, and what certainly I hope people will do, is to investigate for themselves, to look for themselves, not just rely upon what they're told by politicians and pundits, but to you can just go online and Google Hong Kong Article 23, and you can get the text of the legislation. You can get a lot of the information that was put out in the period of public discussion and debate. And I think that people can just inform themselves, and that's that's the most important way for us to to push back against the misinformation and the distortions that are peddled to us on a very regular basis.
Okay, Judge Julie Tang and Professor Ken Hammond, thank you very much. We'll close this episode, and hopefully our viewers will look on to us for future episodes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you still recording?